It was one of those sticky summer evenings in East London where the air felt thick enough to chew. The sun had just dipped below the rooftops, but the heat hadn't let up, not by a long shot. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows over cracked pavements and overflowing bins. Somewhere down the block, a radio played an old grime track, its bass thumping like a tired heartbeat. In the middle of it all, walking with his hands tucked in the pockets of his joggers and earbuds snug in his ears, was a tall, broad-shouldered man most people knew from memes, music videos, and late-night comedy sketches. But right now he wasn't Big Shaq or any kind of character. He was just a guy heading home after a solid 2-hour workout at his local gym. He'd been lifting, sweating and stretching like he did most evenings. It helped clear his head. Between writing lyrics, filming sketches, and juggling life's everyday chaos, the gym was his quiet place. He wore a plain black t-shirt, slightly damp at the back, and his trainers were scuffed from months of use. Nothing flashy, nothing to draw attention. His headphones played a beat he'd been working on, just a rough draft, nothing polished yet, but it was enough to keep his mind off the day's frustrations. He bobbed his head slightly as he walked, lost in rhythm, unaware of the low rumble growing behind him. Then came the roar. Not the kind from a passing bus or a distant plane, but the deep, aggressive growl of motorcycle engines revving too close for comfort. He pulled one earbud out just as 3 bikes screeched to a halt a few feet ahead, blocking the narrow path under a railway bridge. The area was poorly lit, the kind of shortcut locals use to cut 10 minutes off their walk, but also the kind of place trouble liked to linger after dark. The riders killed their engines one by one, the sudden silence somehow louder than the noise had been. They wore matching black leather vests unzipped over faded band tees. Chains dangled from their belts, and one had a patch stitched onto his back that read Iron Fangs, a name that sounded more like a pub quiz team than a real gang. But the way they moved said otherwise. They dismounted slowly, stretching like predators waking up. Their eyes locked onto him not with curiosity, but with something colder, something mean. The biggest of them, a man with a shaved head and a thick neck tattooed with symbols that looked hastily done in a prison yard, stepped forward first. He spat on the ground, missing the pavement by inches. "Well, well," he said, voice rough like gravel under boots. "Look what wandered into our patch." The others chuckled, low and throaty, like they'd rehearsed it. The man in the black t-shirt didn't react right away. He just stood there, calm, sizing them up without looking like he was doing it. He'd seen this before, not exactly like this, but close enough. The posturing, the false confidence, the need to feel big by making someone else small. He'd learned long ago that reacting with anger only poured fuel on that kind of fire, so he kept his voice even, polite even, when he finally spoke. "Evening," he said, "just heading home. Mind letting me through?" The leader smirked, stepping closer. "You always walk around here looking like you own the place? With your fancy trainers and your little earbuds?" He mimicked plugging something into his ear, then laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever done. One of the others, thinner but wiry, with greasy hair pulled into a short ponytail, chimed in. "He talks proper, don't he? Like he's on the telly or summit." Another snorted. "Maybe he thinks he is on the telly." That's when the slurs started. Quiet at first, then louder. Words meant to cut, to humiliate, to remind him he didn't belong even though he'd lived in this city his whole life. They mocked his accent, his skin, the way he carried himself. They called him names that made his stomach tighten, not out of fear but out of that old, tired disappointment, the kind that settles in your bones when you realize some people will never see you as human. Still, he didn't raise his voice. He just looked at them one by one, meeting their eyes without flinching. "I don't want any trouble," he said. "I've got a long day tomorrow. Just let me pass." But that calmness, maybe that's what set them off, because to them calm looked like arrogance, like he thought he was better than them. The big one stepped right into his space, close enough that he could smell stale beer and cheap cologne. "You don't get to decide what happens here," the biker growled. "This is our road, and you're just passing through, like trash." Then without warning, he shoved him hard in the chest. The force sent him stumbling back, heels scraping against the rough concrete. His earbuds yanked out, the music cutting off mid-beat. For a split second, everything went quiet. Even the distant city sounds seemed to pause, but he didn't fall. He caught himself, feet wide, arms loose at his sides. His breathing stayed steady. His eyes didn't dart around looking for escape. They stayed locked on the man who'd pushed him, That's when something shifted, not in the air, not in the light, but in him. A quiet switch flipped. Not anger, not fear. Just awareness. Full, clear awareness. Because this wasn't the first time he'd been tested, and it wouldn't be the last. Years ago, when he was just a teenager, his father, a quiet man who worked double shifts at a warehouse, had taken him to a small martial arts club above a laundromat in Peckham. "You don't have to fight," his dad had said, "but you must know how to protect yourself. Not just your body, your dignity." He'd trained in judo first, then Brazilian jiu-jitsu, then a bit of boxing. Not to become a fighter, but to understand balance, timing, and control. He'd never posted about it online. Never bragged. To most people, he was just the funny guy who rapped about not eating chicken or wearing tracksuits. They didn't know about the early mornings on the mat, the bruises, the discipline, and right now, standing under that dim bridge with 3 hostile men closing in, that training hummed in his muscles like a second heartbeat. The biker who'd shoved him laughed, thinking he'd won. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" He didn't answer. He just took a slow breath in through his nose, let it out through his mouth. Centered himself. One of the other bikers stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Let's teach him a lesson he won't forget. They started to circle him like wolves testing prey. But he didn't turn with them. He stayed rooted, turning only his head, tracking each movement. His shoulders dropped slightly. His hands stayed open, relaxed, not clenched like someone ready to brawl, but ready like someone who knew exactly what to do if it came to that. A car passed on the main road nearby, headlights sweeping across the tunnel for a second, illuminating the tension like a spotlight. In that flash, the bikers saw something they hadn't expected. No panic in his eyes. No pleading. Just focus. Calm, unshakable focus. The leader hesitated, just for a heartbeat. But pride pushed him forward. "You think you're tough?" He sneered. "Let's see how tough you are when you're eating pavement," he lunged. And that's when everything changed. But that's another part of the story. For now, under that bridge, with the city humming in the distance and the smell of oil and sweat hanging in the air, the moment hung like a held breath, charged, dangerous, and utterly still. The kind of moment that doesn't just change a night, but can change a life. He didn't see the punch coming, not exactly, but he didn't need to. His body already knew what to do before his mind had time to catch up. Years of repetition, of falling and getting back up, of learning how to read weight shifts and breathing patterns. They all clicked into place like gears in a well-oiled machine. The biker swung wide, arm cocked back like he was throwing a haymaker in a pub brawl. It was wild, untrained, full of anger but no control. That made it easier to handle. As the fist cut through the air toward his face, he didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped slightly to the side, not far, just enough, and let the man's own momentum carry him forward. At the same time, he hooked his right arm under the biker's shoulder, turned his hips, and dropped his center of gravity. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was effective. The biker went airborne for half a second before crashing onto the concrete with a heavy thud. The sound echoed under the bridge like a dropped sack of bricks. He groaned, more from shock than pain, and lay there stunned, blinking up at the dim yellow light overhead. Silence. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The other 2 bikers froze mid-step, eyes wide. The one on the ground tried to push himself up, but his arms shook like they couldn't remember how to work. He looked more confused than hurt, like the world had tilted on its axis and he hadn't been warned. The man in the black t-shirt didn't gloat. He didn't smirk or throw a taunt. He just stood there, calm, breathing evenly, hands still open at his sides. "I told you," he said quietly. "I don't want trouble." But that calm only made things worse, because now the remaining bikers weren't just angry, they were embarrassed. And embarrassment, especially for men who built their identity on looking tough, is a dangerous thing. It twists pride into something sharp and reckless. "Right, that's it." The wiry one with the ponytail snapped. He pulled a chain from his belt, not to swing, just to let it dangle like a threat. "You think you're some kind of martial arts master? We'll see how clever you are with 2 of us on you." The third biker, the quietest of the group, cracked his neck and rolled his shoulders. He didn't say a word, but his stance said plenty. He was coiled tight, ready to spring. They didn't charge all at once, that would have been too easy. Instead, they split. One moving left, the other right, trying to box him in against the damp brick wall. Smart, in a crude sort of way, but they didn't understand spacing. They didn't know that in close quarters, a trained person doesn't need room to swing, they just need an inch. He kept his eyes moving, never locking onto one attacker for too long. Peripheral vision was everything. He could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their feet shifted before they moved. He remembered his old instructor's voice. Don't fight the person. Fight the space between you. The wiry one lunged first, chain whipping forward like a snake. But it was slow, too slow. He sidestepped, caught the man's wrist mid-swing and used the chain's own weight to yank him off balance. Before the biker could react, a quick sweep of the leg sent him stumbling sideways into the wall. He hit it with a grunt, the chain clattering to the ground. At the same time, the third biker rushed in from the other side, arms out like he was going for a tackle. But instead of backing up, which would have trapped him against the wall, he stepped into the attack. Right into the man's chest. It threw off the biker's timing. In that split second of confusion, he grabbed the man's collar and elbow, twisted his hips, and dropped low. Another throw, cleaner this time. The biker flipped over his hip and landed hard on his back. The wind knocked clean out of him. Now all three were down, one groaning on the ground, one slumped against the wall rubbing his ribs. And the leader, the big one, still trying to push himself up on shaky arms, his face red with rage and humiliation. The man in the black t-shirt didn't press his advantage. He didn't kick, punch, or stand over them like a victor. He just took a step back, giving them space, giving them a chance to think. You don't know who I am, the leader panted, glaring up at him. You've got no idea what you just did. I know exactly who you are, he replied, voice low but steady. You're the kind of people who think strength means pushing others down. But real strength? It's knowing when to walk away. The words hung in the air, heavier than any punch. For a long moment nobody spoke. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic, the drip of water from a broken pipe above, and the ragged breathing of the bikers. The leader finally pushed himself fully upright, wincing as he touched his shoulder. He looked at his friends, both still dazed, both clearly in pain, and then back at the man standing calmly in front of them. Something in his expression changed. Not fear exactly, more like realization, like he'd walked into a room thinking it was empty, only to find someone already sitting in the dark waiting. You're not what I thought you were, he muttered, almost to himself. No, the man said, I'm not. He didn't say it with pride. Just truth. Then slowly he bent down and picked up his fallen earbuds. One was cracked but still usable. He slipped it back in, though he didn't turn the music on. He just needed to feel normal again, to reconnect with the world outside this ugly little moment. He turned to leave. Wait, the leader called out, voice rough but quieter now. He paused but didn't turn around. Why didn't you hurt us worse? The man asked. You could have. We came at you hard. He thought about that for a second. Then he turned his head just enough to look over his shoulder. Because hurting you wouldn't prove anything. And it wouldn't change what you believe. Only you can do that. And with that, he walked away. His steps were steady, not hurried. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel their eyes on him until he reached the end of the underpass and stepped back into the glow of the streetlights. But the truth was, his hands were shaking, not from fear, though there had been a flicker of that when the first shove came, but from the adrenaline, the tension, the sheer weight of holding back. Because he could have done more. He knew techniques that could disable, dislocate, silence, but he'd chosen not to. That choice took more strength than any throw or strike ever could. As he walked, he passed a small convenience store. The owner, an older man with thick glasses, was wiping down the counter. He glanced up, saw the sweat on his brow, the scuffed knees of his joggers, and gave a slow nod, like he understood without needing words. The man nodded back and kept walking. By the time he reached his flat, his heart had settled. He unlocked the door, stepped inside and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed. The familiar smell of home, laundry, old books, a hint of last night's curry washed over him. Safe. He went to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and drank it slowly. Then he sat at the small table by the window, looking out at the city lights. His mind replayed the encounter not with pride but with reflection. He thought about his father years ago, standing in that same laundromat doorway watching him struggle through his first judo class. This isn't about fighting, his dad had said. It's about respect. For yourself. For others, even the ones who don't deserve it yet. Back then, he hadn't fully understood. Now he did. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a vigilante. He was just a man who'd been pushed too far and chose to respond with control instead of chaos. That was the real lesson his training had taught him. Power isn't in how hard you can hit. It's in how well you can hold yourself together when everything around you is falling apart. Later that night, as he lay in bed, he didn't sleep right away. He thought about those bikers, not with anger but with a strange kind of pity. They were trapped in their own hate, their own fear, their need to feel big by making others small. And maybe, just maybe, tonight had planted a tiny seed of doubt in their minds. Not enough to change them overnight, but enough to make them pause next time. He hoped so. Because the world didn't need more violence. It needed more moments like this. Quiet, human moments where someone chooses dignity over destruction. And as the city hummed outside his window, he finally closed his eyes, not as a fighter, not as a celebrity, but simply as a man who'd done the right thing and gone home to rest. The first siren cut through the night like a warning. Not loud, not urgent, just a distant wail that grew steadily closer, bouncing off brick walls and parked cars. He was still sitting at his kitchen table, staring out the window, when blue and red lights began to flash across the ceiling. He didn't panic. He'd called the police himself before even stepping inside his flat. Not out of fear, but because he knew how these things could twist if left unsaid. Better to tell the truth while it was still fresh before rumors filled the gaps. He took a slow breath, stood up, and walked to the door just as a sharp knock came. 2 officers stood there, one older with tired eyes and a neatly trimmed mustache, the other younger, fresh-faced, gripping his radio like he was still learning the weight of the job. Both looked calm, professional. "Evening," the older one said. "You the one who reported the incident under the railway bridge?" He nodded. "Yeah, that was me." They stepped inside only after he invited them, and he offered them tea. The younger officer looked surprised, but the older one gave a small smile and accepted. While the kettle boiled, he told them everything, exactly as it happened. No exaggeration. No downplaying. He described the bikes, the vests, the words they'd used, the shove, the way they'd circled him. He explained how he'd moved, what techniques he'd used, and, most importantly, that he hadn't struck anyone, hadn't kicked, hadn't gone after them once they were down. "I just wanted to get home," he said, handing the older officer a mug. "I didn't go looking for trouble." The younger officer scribbled notes, glancing up every so often like he was trying to match the man in front of him, the calm, polite one making tea, with the image of someone who'd just taken down 3 bikers barehanded. "Do you have any training?" the older officer asked, blowing on his tea. "Since I was 16, he replied. "Judo, jiu-jitsu, a bit of boxing, but I've never used it outside the gym until tonight." The officer nodded slowly. "Good, that matters." They asked if he wanted medical attention. He declined. His knuckles weren't even scraped. Then they asked about cameras, CCTV, doorbell footage, anything. He didn't have much, but he remembered a small shop near the bridge had a camera above its awning. The officers made a note. Before they left, the older one paused at the door. "You did everything right," he said quietly. "Reported it fast, stayed calm, didn't escalate. That takes more guts than most people realize." He just nodded. "Thanks." After they left, the flat felt too quiet. He turned on the radio. Low volume, just enough to fill the silence with something gentle. Then he sat back down, this time with a notebook. Not to write lyrics, but to process. He scribbled a few lines. Strength isn't loud. It's the quiet choice not to break someone when you could. He stared at it for a while, then closed the book. The next morning, the story was already moving. Not on the front page, not yet, but in local WhatsApp groups. On community Facebook pages, in hushed conversations at bus stops. Someone had filmed part of it from a window above the bridge. The video was shaky, dark, but clear enough to show 3 men surrounding one, then 2 of them going down in quick succession. The clip ended before the police arrived, which meant the internet filled in the blanks, some accurately, most wildly off. By lunchtime, a local news van was parked down the street. Reporters knocked on his door, microphones in hand, asking for a statement, a reaction, a quote. He didn't answer. He drew the curtains and kept working on his music. But he couldn't ignore the messages piling up, some supportive, some skeptical, a few outright hostile. One read, "You think you're some kind of hero now? Stay in your lane. He didn't reply. He knew better than to feed the noise. What he didn't expect was the knock later that afternoon, not from reporters, but from a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a faded Brixton Community Center lanyard around her neck. She introduced herself as a youth coordinator. She'd heard what happened, not from the news, but from a teenager who'd been walking home and saw the whole thing. "He couldn't stop talking about how you stayed calm," she said, standing on his doorstep. "Said you moved like water, just flowed around them. He's been bullied for months. Never fought back because he was scared it'd make things worse. But after seeing you, he asked me if your dojo takes beginners. He hadn't even thought about that. That someone might see his actions not as violence, but as an example. I don't run a dojo," he said gently. "I just train." "But you could," she replied. "Not as a fighter, as a teacher. Kids around here need to see that strength and kindness aren't opposites." Her words stayed with him long after she left. Later that week, the police confirmed the bikers had been identified. 2 had prior records, minor stuff, mostly public order offenses. But the leader had a history of hate-related incidents. They were being held on charges of assault and racially aggravated threatening behavior. Body cam footage from the responding officers, plus the shopkeeper's CCTV, backed up his account completely. No charges against him. Just a statement of support from the local police commander. This was a clear case of lawful self-defense by a citizen who showed remarkable restraint. Still, the online chatter didn't die down. Some called him brave. Others accused him of showing off or using martial arts to intimidate. A few even claimed he'd provoked the bikers just for clout. He scrolled through it once, then deleted the apps for a few days. He'd learned long ago that the internet amplifies everything. Truth, lies, noise, and the only way to stay sane is to step away. What mattered more was what happened offline. A few days after the incident, he visited the community center the woman had mentioned. It was a modest building with peeling paint and a basketball hoop missing one net. But inside it buzzed with life. Kids doing homework, elders playing dominoes, a cooking class filling the hallway with the smell of stew. He didn't come as a celebrity. He came in a hoodie, no cap, just another face. The coordinator showed him around. Then in a small back room used for meetings, a group of teenagers sat waiting. Not many, just 6 or 7, but their eyes were sharp, curious. One boy, no older than 15, sat with his arms crossed, gaze fixed on the floor. "This is him," the coordinator said simply. He didn't give a speech. He just pulled up a chair and asked, "What do you want to know?" At first, silence. Then the boy with his arms crossed spoke. "Did you really not hit them?" "No," he said. "I used throws and holds, things that stop someone without hurting them. My teacher always said, if you leave a fight with blood on your hands, you've already lost." The boy looked up. "But they called you all kinds of things. How'd you not snap?" He thought for a moment. "Because I knew who I was." And their words couldn't change that. Once you're sure of yourself, hate just bounces off. Another teen asked about training. How long it took. How much it cost. Whether you had to be strong to start. "You don't need muscles," he said. "You need patience. And respect for the art, for your partner, for yourself." He stayed for 2 hours. Didn't teach a single move. Just talked. Listened. Shared stories about falling on his face during his first sparring session. About how scared he used to be walking home from school. About how discipline gave him confidence long before fame ever did. By the time he left, the coordinator handed him a list. "These kids want to try martial arts," she said. "But most can't afford lessons." He looked at the names, the ages, the notes beside them. Father in prison. Bullied at school. Cares for younger siblings. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "I'll see what I can do," he said, and he meant it. That night, he called his old instructor, the man who'd taught him in that laundromat above Peckham. They hadn't spoken in years, but the voice on the other end was the same. Warm, steady, full of quiet wisdom. "I heard what happened," the instructor said. "You made me proud." They talked for an hour about technique, yes, but mostly about purpose. About how martial arts wasn't about winning fights, but about building people. Before hanging up, the instructor said, "If you ever want to bring kids here, the mats are always open." He smiled for the first time in days. The next morning, he went back to the gym, not his usual one, but the old place above the laundromat. It hadn't changed much. Same creaky stairs, same smell of sweat and disinfectant, same faded posters of legendary fighters on the walls. He rolled out a mat, sat cross-legged, and just breathed. For the first time since the incident, he felt peace. Not because the danger was gone, but because he knew what to do with it. Not fight it. Not fear it. Just move through it like water around stone, and somewhere, in a small room in Brixton, a boy who'd never thrown a punch was dreaming of standing tall. Not to hurt anyone, but to finally feel safe in his own skin. That, more than anything, was worth fighting for. The first class happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, in a room that smelled faintly of old carpet and floor polish. It wasn't a proper dojo, just a cleared-out storage space at the back of the community center, with mats borrowed from a local school and a single mirror taped to the wall. But to the 8 teenagers who showed up, it felt like sacred ground. He didn't wear a GI or a black belt. He wore joggers, a plain white t-shirt, and trainers with worn soles. No fanfare, no introduction. He just stood in the middle of the room and said, "All right, let's start with how to fall." That surprised them. They'd expected punches, kicks, maybe dramatic throws like in the videos, but instead he taught them how to hit the ground without getting hurt, how to tuck their chins, roll with the impact, protect their heads. Because, he explained, the first thing you need to learn isn't how to knock someone down, it's how to get back up. One boy, the quiet one who'd been bullied, fell awkwardly the first time and winced. Instead of correcting him harshly, he knelt beside him. "Try again. And this time, don't fight the fall. Let it happen. Trust your body." The boy nodded, took a breath, and tried. This time, he rolled smoothly onto his shoulder and popped back up. His eyes lit up, not with pride, but with something deeper. Relief. Like he'd just discovered his body could be a friend, not just something to hide. That became the rhythm of the sessions. No shouting, no ego. Just slow, patient work. They learned how to stand with balance, how to move without telegraphing their intentions, how to use an opponent's force against them, not to dominate, but to neutralize. He called it redirecting energy, not fighting. And every lesson ended the same way, with a short talk. "Martial arts isn't about being better than someone else," he'd say, sitting cross-legged on the mat while the others caught their breath. "It's about being better than you were yesterday. Stronger in your mind, calmer in your heart." Word spread, not through social media, but through hallway whispers and bus stop conversations. A girl from a nearby estate started coming. Then her younger brother, a kid who'd been suspended for fighting at school, showed up one day, arms crossed, skeptical, but stayed for the whole hour. By the 5th week, they had 12 regulars. The community center had to find a bigger room. He didn't do it alone. His old instructor came down twice a month to help, and a retired nurse from the neighborhood volunteered to teach basic first aid alongside the self-defense. It became more than training, it became a space. A place where kids who usually felt invisible could walk in and be seen, not for their grades or their postcode or their past mistakes, but for their effort, their respect, their willingness to try. One evening, after class, the coordinator pulled him aside. "You've changed something here," she said, voice soft. "Not just in them, in the whole vibe of the place. Parents are asking about it. Teachers are noticing kids standing taller." He didn't know what to say to that. He just nodded and looked out the window at the rain tapping against the glass. He hadn't set out to change anything. He'd only wanted to make sure what happened under that bridge didn't happen to someone else who wasn't ready. But maybe that was how real change started. Not with grand speeches or viral moments, but with small, steady acts of care. A mat on the floor. A hand offered to help someone up. A quiet voice saying, "Try again." Meanwhile, life outside the center kept moving. The legal case against the bikers dragged on, but the evidence was strong. 2 of them took plea deals. The leader, the one with the tattoo, fought it, claiming he'd been ambushed, but the CCTV footage told a different story. In the end, all 3 were given community service, anger management courses, and a court order to stay away from the area. No jail time, but consequences nonetheless. He didn't feel triumphant, just relieved. Justice wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just paperwork and court dates and people finally having to face what. He still got messages online, some thanking him, others still accusing him of playing the victim or using race for attention. He'd learned to let those go. What mattered was the boy who now walked to school with his shoulders back. The girl who told her mom she finally felt safe taking the bus home. The teen who used a simple wrist release to get away from a grab in the market and came running to class the next day, eyes wide with disbelief. It actually worked. That was the real victory. One Saturday, he brought the group to his old gym, the one above the laundromat. The owner, a wiry man with a thick accent and a permanent scowl, grunted when he saw them but didn't say no. The kids were in awe. To them, this place felt like a temple. The mats were worn thin in spots, the mirrors fogged at the edges, but it smelled like sweat and discipline, the kind that builds character, not just muscle. His instructor ran them through basic drills, stances, footwork, controlled partner exercises. No sparring, not yet. You don't learn to fight by fighting, he told them. You learn by listening, to your body, to your partner, to the space between you. Afterward, over cups of cheap tea from the laundromat's kettle, the kids asked questions. Not about moves, but about life. Did you ever get scared? One asked. Yeah, he said. All the time. But fear doesn't mean you stop. It just means you pay attention. Another asked, do you think those bikers will change? He thought about that. I don't know, but I hope they at least think twice next time before they judge someone by how they look. Back at the community center the following week, something shifted. The kids weren't just learning techniques, they were teaching each other. The older ones helped the younger ones with roles. Someone brought in extra water bottles. A girl who barely spoke the first week now led the warm-up stretches. It wasn't his class anymore. It was theirs. He started stepping back more, letting them lead parts of the session. He'd watch from the corner, arms crossed, smiling to himself. This was what his father had meant all those years ago. Not just self-defense, but self-respect and community. One evening, as he was packing up the mats, the quiet boy, the one who'd been bullied, stayed behind. He shuffled his feet for a moment, then looked up. Before, I used to think being strong meant never getting hurt, he said softly, but now I think it means knowing you can get hurt and still keep going. The man just nodded. That's exactly it. They walked out together into the cool night air. The streetlights were on, casting long shadows, but the path ahead was clear, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like hope wasn't just a word. It was something you could build. One mat, one lesson, one quiet act of courage at a time. Months passed, and the story that had started under a dim railway bridge slowly settled into the rhythm of everyday life. The news vans were long gone. The online noise had faded into the background hum of the internet, replaced by newer dramas and louder voices. But in East London, something quieter and far more lasting had taken root. The little martial arts group at the community center wasn't little anymore. It had grown into a proper program, with a waiting list and a rotating roster of volunteer instructors. Local businesses chipped in. Someone donated secondhand mats, a sports shop gave discounted uniforms, and the laundromat owner started offering free tea and biscuits after every session. What began as a response to one night of ugliness had become a steady light in the neighborhood. He still showed up most weeks, though he no longer led every class. He'd sit on the edge of the mat, watching as teenagers who once slouched in silence now moved with purpose, helping each other perfect a stance or adjust a grip. Some had even started mentoring younger kids from the estate. One girl, barely 14, now ran a Saturday morning session for children under 10, teaching them how to fall safely and breathe through frustration. She called it calm strength. He never took credit for any of it. When people asked how it all started, he'd just shrug and say, it wasn't me. It was them. They wanted to learn. I just showed up. But showing up, that was the thing. In a world full of noise and quick exits, showing up week after week without fanfare, without expecting anything in return, that was rare. And powerful. His own life hadn't stopped, of course. He still wrote music, still filmed sketches, still laughed with friends over late-night takeaways. But something had shifted in his work. His lyrics now carried quieter truths, about dignity, about walking away from fights that weren't worth winning, about finding your footing when the ground feels shaky. He didn't preach. He just told stories, real ones, human ones, and people listened. Not because he was loud, but because he felt honest. One evening, after a recording session, he walked past the railway bridge again. It was just after sunset, the sky streaked with orange and purple. He slowed as he reached the spot where it all happened. The graffiti was still there, the same cracked pavement, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It just felt like a place, no more, no less. He stood there for a moment, not out of fear or nostalgia, but acknowledgement. This was where he'd been tested, and this was where he'd chosen who he wanted to be. Not in a grand declaration, but in the small, steady refusal to become what they expected him to be. A few days later, he got a letter. Not an email, not a DM, a real letter, handwritten on lined notebook paper. It was from the leader of the bikers, the one with the shaved head and the prison yard tattoos. He was serving his community service hours at a recycling center on the other side of town. The letter didn't apologize, not exactly. But it said this, and I watched the footage. Saw how you moved. Saw how you didn't finish us when you could have. I thought you were soft. Turns out you were strong in a way I didn't understand. I'm not saying I get it yet, but I'm trying. Started talking to a counselor. Harder than I thought, anyway. Thanks for not making me worse that night. He read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. Not to hold on to anger, not to feel superior, but as a reminder that people can change even when you least expect it. Even when they don't deserve it yet. Around the same time, the community center launched a scholarship fund, quietly, without press. It covered martial arts fees, transport costs, even school supplies for kids who needed them. He'd set it up anonymously at first, but the coordinator gently insisted he let his name be attached. Not for fame, she said, but so others know it's possible, that someone who's been in the spotlight can still care about the corners no one sees. So he agreed, and soon other local figures, musicians, shop owners, retired teachers started contributing too. It wasn't about money. It was about saying, we see you, and you matter. One Saturday, he visited a new class at a youth club in another part of the city. A teacher there had reached out after hearing about the program. The kids were different, some younger, some older, some carrying heavier burdens, but their eyes held the same mix of caution and curiosity. He didn't teach them throws or locks that day. He just sat with them and talked about respect, for yourself, for your space, for the fact that everyone is fighting something you can't see. Afterward, a boy about 12 tugged his sleeve. Do you ever get scared people won't believe you're really like this? He asked. Like they only see the funny videos and think you're joking all the time? He smiled, all the time. But that's okay. You don't live your life for what people think. You live it for what you know is right. The boy nodded like he was storing that away for later. Back home that night, he sat on his balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights blink on one by one. The air was cool, the kind of quiet that only comes after a long day of good work. He thought about his father, now older, still working, still proud, but never saying it outright. He thought about the kids at the center, laughing as they practiced roles, arguing good-naturedly over who had the best stance. He thought about the biker's letter, folded in his drawer, and he realized something simple but true. Real strength isn't about winning. It's about planting seeds and trusting they'll grow, even if you never see the tree. He never became a hero in the way movies show it. No medals, no headlines, no dramatic speeches, but in the lives of a dozen teenagers, in the quiet confidence of a bullied kid who now walks tall, in the ripple of kindness that spread from one act of restraint, that was legacy enough. And whenever he passed that underpass now, he didn't tense up. He just walked with the same calm stride he always had, not because the world was safe, but because he knew how to move through it, with grace, with discipline, and with his humanity intact. The story didn't end with a fight. It ended with a door left open, a mat rolled out, a hand offered to someone who needed it. And in a world that often feels divided, that kind of ending, quiet, human, full of hope, might just be the most powerful one of all.